All right, we're continuing to look at Elisha, and we are in 2 Kings chapter 6 tonight. If you remember from last time, we saw the story of Elisha where he miraculously made a lost axe head float in the river, and tonight we're going to look at a story that involves the city of Samaria, which was the capital city of the northern kingdom of Israel, where Elisha is ministering. We are going to see them being put under siege by the Syrian army and how God works through that. And I want you to look, here's your assignment as we study through this. I want you to look, and by the time we finish our study tonight, I want you to be able to tell me what the miracle of the floating axe head has to do with the siege of Samaria that we're going to talk about tonight. All right? Okay, so let's jump in. Ready? Look at you. You can't wait, right? Here we go. All right. I'm in chapter 6 of 2 Kings, verse 24. And it had happened after this. Now, I guess I should remind us what the this was that we're talking about. But you remember the Syrian army had been doing raids into Israel, and they were constantly being thwarted because Elisha was telling the king of Israel where the Syrian army was moving, and so they were kind of prepared before they got there. And so when the Syrian king figures out what's going on, he decides he's going to go kill Elisha. Well, long story short, Elisha, prays, and God strikes the Syrian army with blindness so they can't see, and they're basically, Elisha kind of leads them into sort of a trap, if we want to look at it that way, and brings them, to Samaria in front of the king of Israel, and basically the king of Israel feeds them, gives them water, shows them kindness, sends them back to their own land, and the raids stop for a little bit. So now we're to verse 24. It happened after this that Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, gathered all his army and went up and besieged Samaria. There was a great famine in Samaria, and indeed they besieged it until a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver, and 1/4 of a cob of dove droppings for 5 shekels of silver. Then as the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "Help, my lord, O king." And he said, "If the Lord does not help you, where can I find help for you? From the threshing floor or from the winepress?" Then the king said to her, "What is troubling you?" And she answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give your son, that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we boiled my son and ate him. And I said to her on the next day, 'Give your son, that we may eat him.' But she has hidden her son." Now it happened when the king heard the words of the woman that he tore his clothes, and as he passed by on the wall, the people looked, and there underneath he had sackcloth on his body. Then he said, "God, do so to me, and more also, if the head of Elisha the son of Shaphat remains on him today." But Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him, and the king sent a man ahead of him. But before the messenger came to him, he said to the elders, "Do you see how this son of a murderer has sent someone to take away my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold him fast at the door. Is not the sound of his master's feet behind him?" And while he was still talking with them, there was the messenger coming down to him. And then the king said, "Surely this calamity is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" All right. Bad times in Israel, weren't they? So we see here in these verses that Syria is being the aggressor towards Israel again. This is a little bit different than what we had seen earlier in the chapter. How is it different? Right, that's right. So it seems to be much more intense. Before it just seemed to be raiding parties that would come in and, raid and then go. Now you have the whole army and they're besieging the whole city of Samaria. Some time has passed. We don't really know how much time has passed, but we do know from the verses that we read last time that for a while at least the raid stopped. So the miraculous blinding of the army and then the subsequent kindness shown by the king of Israel by not putting him to death, it worked to stop the raids for a while. But now some time has passed and now it's gone from a raid to a full-on siege of Samaria. And what else do you see here? Before, what thwarted the raids? And what do we not see in this one? Yeah, we don't see the king of Israel listening to or heeding the counsel of Elisha anymore, do we? In fact, what does the king of Israel want to do to Elisha? He wants to kill him, right? So we've gone from the prophet being an advisor to the king, now to the prophet being seen as an enemy of the king, by the king. So, now we get this really gruesome story about the king of Israel. The city's under siege. We're told about how the exorbitant prices of just trying to get something to eat. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. But just crazy amount of money just for something that you and I wouldn't even consider food anyway. And then you get this woman calling out to the king of Israel as he passes by, "Help me." He said, "Lady, if the Lord can't help you, then I sure ain't going to either. What's wrong anyway?" And she says, "Well, I made this deal with this woman that we would eat each other's kids. And one day we would boil my son and eat him, and the next day we'd boil her son and eat him," and which is just crazy. So we boiled my son one day, and now she's hidden the other one. Now this is a really sick, twisted version of what other story from the Old Testament does it sound like? Solomon. Yeah, King Solomon. You remember that? That you had the one woman who had rolled over on her baby, and there was a question. We have a dead baby and a live baby, and we have a question over who's the mother of the living child. And Solomon says, "Well, let's take a sword, cut the baby in half." He never intended to do that, but he shows great wisdom because the real mother, the true mother, says, "Oh, just give her the baby. Don't kill the baby. Don't give her to her." And then she ends up, by that proving that she's the real mom. Well, here we get this really weird, sick twist on that story of you've got two women and they agree to eat each other's kids. One of them gives their kid to be boiled and eaten, and then the other one hides their kid. And so the king, unlike Solomon, who says, "Oh, well, obviously, this is the solution," what does he do? He runs off and puts on sackcloth, which he should have had on before then. He doesn't know what to do. Why does the Bible, God's holy word, why does it include a story like this? Do what? Yeah, the desperation of it, it underscores the magnitude of the crisis and the desperation of the people. Like, you're supposed to hear this and realize that things are about as bad as they could possibly be. The capital city, is surrounded by the Syrian army. Here's the thing. It would be as if some foreign army had Washington, D.C. surrounded, all of our military force cut off, totally ineffective, and you go to the grocery store and there's nothing to eat, but you see a guy on the side of the road selling a donkey head for $15,000, that you think, well, man, if I could just come up with $15,000, I could go home and boil a donkey's head and have a little bit of supper tonight. And then it gets so bad that people are resorting to cannibalizing their own children. I mean, I don't know how it gets worse than that. That's about as bad as it can be. So what is that? What are we supposed to get out of this? That the only hope of deliverance is from whom? God. And that's the point that's being made here. Now, the king, he hears this horrible story about women cannibalizing their children, and his first go-to thing, his solution is this: I'm going to do what? I'm going to kill Elisha. Now, why does he want to kill Elisha? Yeah, he believes it's God doing it, and because we see that from a couple of things. He tells the woman who says, "Help me." He says, "Well, God ain't helping us. What makes you think I can?" So he obviously is blaming God for the situation. And then we see that also in verse 33, surely this calamity is from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer? In other words, I've waited long enough for God to deliver us. Obviously, he's the one doing this. I'm taking matters into my own hands. Do we ever do that? And that's when we mess up. Whenever you say, I've waited long enough for God, I'm going to take matters into my own hands, that's where you can mark it down. You will have messed up at that point. Also, possibly he believes that Syria is still holding a grudge against Elijah for the incident that we looked at last time, where the blindness and when you're sent home, kind of it's kind of it's a humbling thing when you go out a mighty soldier and you come back with your tail tucked between your legs and you've been blinded and you should have been dead, put to death, but by the grace of the enemy's king, you've been returned home. It's a humbling experience, and so maybe the king of Israel thinks that the Syrian king holds a grudge against Israel because of what Elisha did. I don't really think that's the motivation of the Syrian king, but I think it's possible that the Israelite king believed that. Questions on those verses? All right, let's look on then to chapter 7, verse 1. Then Elisha said, "Hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow about this time, a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." So an officer on whose hand the king leaned answered the man of God and said, "Look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could this thing be?" And he said, "In fact, you shall see it with your eyes, but you shall not eat of it." Now there were 4 leprous men at the entrance of the gate, and they said to one another, Why are we sitting here until we die? If we say we will enter the city, the famine is in the city, and we shall die there. And if we sit here, we die also. Now therefore come, let us surrender to the army of the Syrians. If they keep us alive, we shall live, and if they kill us, we shall only die. So they rose at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians, and when they had come to the outskirts of the Syrian camp, to their surprise, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the army of the Syrians to hear the noise of chariots and the noise of horses, the noise of a great army. So they said to one another, Look, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to attack us. Therefore they arose and fled at twilight and left the camp intact, their tents, their horses, their donkeys, and they fled for their lives. And when these lepers came to the outskirts of the camp, they went into one tent and ate and drank and carried from it silver and gold and clothing and went and hid them. Then they came back and entered another tent and carried some from there also and went and hid it. They hit the jackpot that day, didn't they? So Elisha here makes two predictions about this siege that's going on in Samaria and the economic condition there. What's the first one that he says? No, the famine will be over because the siege will be lifted. The economic conditions will be drastically improved by this time tomorrow. Now, imagine that. Now, probably nobody in here is old enough to have lived through the Great Depression. I know my dad was a kid when the Great Depression was going on, so I doubt any of you, maybe, I don't know. You all look, let me put it this way, you all look way too young to have lived through the Great Depression. But imagine, I heard my dad tell stories when I was a kid about when he was a kid, and sometimes they would come and if they had just a little pot of peas or something to eat, all day long, that was a good day kind of deal. Imagine, if someone had have gotten up, if a preacher had have gotten up and said, the depression is ending tomorrow, and by tomorrow you'll be able to buy ribeye steaks for 10 cents a pound or whatever, which back, 10 cents in our money, that kind of thing. What would you have said? You're crazy. There's no way. Even no matter what happens, even if the whole world changes today, the price still wouldn't, it would take longer for the price to adjust. And so that's pretty much what the officer of the king says. He says, there's no way. Even if the siege lifts tomorrow, it's going to take longer than that before the economic conditions improve. And Elisha says, well, it is going to happen tomorrow, but what? The second prediction is what? You'll see it, but you won't get to enjoy it. Because of why? Because of unbelief, because of your lack of faith. That's right. Well, lo and behold, God does send deliverance. And how does this accomplish? The whole Syrian army just packs up. They don't pack up. I started to say they pack up and leave. They don't even pack up. They just take off running for home. They leave all of their stuff in place. Why? They got scared because God caused them to hear the noise of chariots and horses, and they believe what? Yeah, they believed that the king of Israel had basically gone to the come hired them as mercenaries to come come help me, come be my ally against the Syrians. And they're like, well, we can't fight all three armies at one time. We're going home. And apparently they were so scared that they didn't even bother to pack up their provisions. They just left. So how do they find out? So everybody is still in the city and they're still starving to death, and the deliverance has already taken place. There's probably a sermon in that one aspect of that. If you wanted to push that just a little bit, deliverance has been accomplished for God's people here, and yet they still sit in squalor because they haven't bothered to look around lately to see what's going on. But here's how they find out about it. You have this group of lepers, and they're sitting around, and they're hungry just like everybody else is hungry, because everybody is hungry because there's a famine because the city's under siege. And so they say to one another, this is silly. We should do something. And so what do they decide to do? Let's just go see if we can surrender to the Syrian army. If they take us out, first of all, they probably don't feel a whole lot of loyalty to Israel, because what are the people of Israel doing? They're leprous people now. So what does Israel do to leprous people? Stay away, unclean. You can't be among us. So if I'm one of the leprous people, I'm thinking, well, these people don't want me. So if they don't want me, maybe I can go over here to the Syrians and surrender. And if they take me in and feed me, I'm a whole lot better off than I am right now. Or if they just decide to kill me right then, at least it puts me out of my misery. I'd rather die by a sword than starve to death. I mean, that's their thought there. I'll be no more dead than I would if I sit here and starve to death. So they go to turn themselves into the Syrian army, but once they get there, they can't find the Syrian army because they've all run back to Syria. But what they do find is what? All their provisions. They go in a tent. Hey, there's food here. We eat, we drink, we get full. Hey, they've got some silver here. We got money. We're full. And now they start to feel bad about that, and we're going to get to that in the next set of verses. But how does this kind of fit in the theme throughout the Bible of the last shall be first? Yeah, I mean, who's the last person that you would expect to end the economic hardship? A leper, right? Who's the last one that you would, when in the middle of a huge economic depression, who's the last person you would expect to come in, as a high roller? The leper, right? Just like who's the last person that you would expect to be the first ones to visit the Messiah? Shepherds. But that's the way God did it. So we see this theme throughout Scripture. The last shall be first. That's why I think if you are always seeming to be the outcast, the downtrodden, or the last in line, don't begrudge that too much, because you're in a good spot spiritually. Don't fight to get to the front of the line too much, because in God's reckoning, it's the last that will be first and the first last. Questions on those verses? All right, let's look on then to verse 9. Then they said to one another, we're not doing right. This day is a day of good news, and we remain silent. If we wait until morning light, some punishment will come upon us. Now, therefore, come, let us go and tell the king's household. Now, let me just stop right there. What did the lepers have that the king of Israel didn't? A conscience and also, knowledge. Well, what they say is, this is good news. If we keep it to ourselves, some punishment is going to come upon us. Who would the punishment come from? So that means they had what? Fear of God and faith in God, something that the king of Israel didn't have. Verse 10, so they went and called to the gatekeepers of the city and told them, saying, we went to Syria and to the Syrian camp, and surprisingly, no one was there, not a human sound, only horses and donkeys tied and the tents intact. And the gatekeepers called out, and they told it to the king's household inside. So the king arose in the night and said to his servants, let me now tell you what the Syrians have done to us. They know that we are hungry, therefore they have gone out of the camp to hide themselves in the field, saying, when they come out of the city, we shall catch them alive and get into the city. And one of his servants answered and said, please, please let several men take 5 of the remaining horses which are left in the city. Look, they may either become like all the multitude of Israel that are left in it, or indeed I say they may become like all the multitude of Israel left from those who are consumed. So let us send them and see. Therefore, they took 2 chariots with horses, and the king sent them in the direction of the Syrian army, saying, go and see. And they went after them to the Jordan, and indeed all the road was full of garments and weapons which the Syrians had thrown away in their haste. So the messengers returned and told the king. Then the people went out and plundered the tents of the Syrians. So a seah of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel, according to the word of the Lord. Now the king had appointed the officer on whose hand he leaned to have charge of the gate. But the people trampled him in the gate, and he died, just as the man of God had said, who spoke when the king came down to him. So it happened, just as the man of God had spoken to the king, saying, 2 seahs of barley for a shekel and a seah of fine flour for a shekel shall be sold tomorrow about this time at the gate of Samaria. Then that officer had answered the man of God and said, now look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could such a thing be? And he said, in fact, you shall see it with your eyes, but you shall not eat of it. And so it happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gate, and he died. That'd make a good movie, wouldn't it? So the lepers come in, they say, this we're not doing right. Look, we're eating, we have our fill, and our fellow Israelites are starving to death. This isn't right. In fact, this is so bad that if we keep this to ourselves, God's going to punish us. And so they go in and they try to get word to the king that, hey, the Syrian army is left. You got all this food, all this money, all the provisions. They left tents and all. All you got to do is go get it. So the messengers go to the king and they say, hey, these lepers said that they went to check, in the Syrian army, and they're all gone, and all their provisions are there. All we got to do is go get them. And what does the king say? Let's go get it. What does he say? Oh, they're just trying to set a trap for us. Yeah, even when God provides the deliverance, the man still don't believe, right? It's like, you remember the story in Acts where Peter's in jail, and the church is holding a prayer meeting, and they're praying that God would free Peter from the jail. And so God does free Peter from the jail. Peter goes to the house where the prayer meeting's going on. He's knocking on the door. The little servant girl comes and says, hey, it's me, Peter. Let me in. She runs and tells the church that's praying, hey, Peter's at the door. Peter's not at the door, sweetheart. He's in jail. That's why we're having this prayer meeting. No, he's at the door knocking. Now, maybe you saw his ghost. Maybe you saw the spirit of Peter, but you didn't see Peter because Peter's in jail. That's why we're having this prayer meeting. I feel like that's kind of the king of Israel. The whole place is praying for deliverance. He's waiting, he's blaming God because God hadn't delivered him. God provides deliverance, and he still don't want to believe. And finally, some of his soldiers say, look, just send some of the people. We're all going to die anyway. Just send some of the people just to see if the report is true. Well, come to find out, it is true. He believes that the Syrians are laying a trap, and he believes what a lot of people believe, that the news is too good to be true. That's why a lot of people stumble over coming to Jesus, because they believe it's just too good to be true. There's got to be more to it than that. I've witnessed to several people that stumbled over that, and they're like, well, what else do I have to do? Well, that's just it. That's, pray, repent of your sins, and believe, that's it. That's, there's got to be more to it than that. There's got to be some rules I got to keep. There's got to be some sort of, benevolent act that I've got to do to, bring penance to my sin and all this stuff. And they stumble over the fact that it just seems too good to be true. But it wasn't too good to be true. God had worked, in fact. So how did Elisha's prophecy get fulfilled? Well, like we said, the lepers, they decide to surrender to the Syrian army, and they find out that the Syrian army is gone and left their provisions behind. So it's fulfilled. Now, I'm always that guy. I want to know, like, how big of a deal was this? What it was like before and what it was like after. And I don't deal in shekels, and I don't deal, we don't deal in seahs and all of that stuff. So I set out trying to figure out in today's money what this would look like. Now that's a little bit tricky, because it's not just the value of a piece of silver today versus then, but it also has to do with what is, the average wage of a worker today versus then and all that. But I found this little website that supposedly will convert biblical measure into today, into American U.S. dollars, in today's dollars, factoring in minimum wage and all that stuff. And so now, I don't know how accurate it is, but I plug numbers in there, and this is what I come up with. So if it's not, if it's off by a few $100s, I'm giving you the numbers that were spit back from that website. But I found it very interesting. In the midst of the siege, in today's dollar, a donkey's head would cost you $14,000. $14,000. Now, I ain't never eat a donkey before in my life. I've eaten a lot of things. I ain't never eat a donkey. But if I were going to eat a donkey, I don't think the head would be a prized piece of meat. Like I'd try to get me some donkey steaks or something out of the deal at least. But for one thing, there's not much meat on it. What are you going to boil the donkey lips for supper? there's just not a lot of meat on a donkey's head. Secondly, I don't think it's a lot of desirable kind of meat, $14,000. I don't, I might be able to, max out every credit card, draw out my retirement. I might be able to go to the store and buy a donkey's head for supper tonight, but it would take some doing for sure. Now, if you don't want to break the bank on a donkey's head, you just want a pint of dove dung, a little bit more reasonable, $870. Dove's droppings, dove poop, dove droppings, yes. $870 for a pint of dove dung. Now, after after the next day. The next day. Now we're not resorting to buying dove dung and donkey's heads anymore. You can get 8 gallons of flour for $174. Now, $174. Now, if you went to Reese's to buy, 8 gallons of flour, and you had to pay $174, that'd be a lot of money. But if you were the day before paying $870 for a pint of dove dung, you can see conditions have drastically improved at this point. Or if you want to go a little bit less quality than flour, you could get a half a bushel of barley for $174. So that same $174 that bought you 8 gallons of flour, if you so choose, would buy you a half a bushel of barley, and you could feed your family a few days on that. So you can see how dramatically things changed in an instant. Now, how did they change? God. Has to be God. The Fed can't change the interest rates and do that, I can tell you. Only God can do that, and He did. Okay, here is the question that I asked you at the beginning to consider. What in the world does this story have to do with the miracle of the floating axe head? Exactly right. You're exactly right. Well, I'm fixing to repeat and sum up basically, but what she said, and I'm kind of summing up a little bit of what she said, is that in both situations it was a seemingly impossible situation. It defied all human logic. It was a case that was a crisis situation in both situations. Because in the case of the floating axe head, it was borrowed. The man obviously didn't have the money to replace it, so that could be very bad. In this case, it's a situation that human logic can't have an answer to. But in both cases, God works, and His solution in both cases defies human logic. Oh, Mr. Elisha, this axe head fell in the Jordan River and sank to the bottom, and it was borrowed, and I don't have the money to replace it. God can fix it. How's He going to fix it? He's going to make the axe head float. Mr. Elisha, you don't understand. The axe head is made of iron, and iron sinks. Not this time, it's not going to. Mr. Elisha, the whole city is surrounded by the Syrian army. They're selling donkeys' heads down at the market for $14,000 a piece. People are trying to eat their own kids. It's as bad as it possibly can be. There's no hope. God's going to fix it. How is He going to fix it? The whole Syrian army is just going to leave and not even take time to pack up. Mr. Elisha, you don't understand. They've got us outnumbered. They've got us outgunned. They've got us starved out. We're only a few days away from total collapse. God's going to do it. This time God's going to do it, and this is how He's going to do it. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. There was an abundance of it for sure. All there for the taking, for sure. All right. I'll give you a couple little theological application questions here. Here's the first one. I want you to complete these 2 sentences. If something seems too good to be true, it usually is. If something is too good to be true, it usually is God. Come on. Stick with me. If something seems too good to be true, it usually is. If something is too good to be true, it's usually God. This is a situation that would seem to be too good to be true, and yet it is true, which means the only explanation is God did it. All right, here's the next one. A young family comes to you in crisis, and the dad confides in you that he wants to believe that God will prove himself faithful in the crisis, but he doesn't see how the situation could possibly work out for the best. How do you encourage him from the story that we looked at tonight? Exactly. I mean, God's solutions often defy human logic. So just because you can't see how God would work it out doesn't mean God won't work it out. Here's what the Lord taught me, and I'm a slow learner. So I had to take the test several times, but the Lord got this through my thick head, that God is faithful, and God will prove himself faithful. I'm not always faithful, but God always is. Even when at the time you may not see how in the world God could possibly work this out to where it would be okay. But God is God, and God is faithful, and that much I know from personal experience. Questions or comments on our study tonight? I appreciate you being here tonight. I hope the Lord has blessed you. We're about to wrap Elisha up, but we've got 3 or 4 more weeks, something like that. We'll get him wrapped up, and then we'll be on to other exciting things in the Lord's Word. So, all right, let's close in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you.